The air was thick with the scent of pine and smoke, the forest clearing alive with murmurs that twisted like shadows between the trees. Torches flickered, casting long, dancing silhouettes over the gathered pack. Every pair of eyes seemed to bore into her, Ilara. The lowly girl no one noticed until now. The girl no one expected to step into the circle of power. And yet, here she was. Her fingers trembled at her sides, brushing the worn fabric of her tunic. She had always moved unseen, a shadow at the edges of every room, a whisper of presence in a world that measured worth in strength and legacy. But tonight, she was the focus. The spectacle. The prize, or the failure. The elders' gazes weighed upon her like iron chains, their eyes sharp, cold, unrelenting. Every whisper of her name carried the weight of judgment. Every movement she made was scrutinized, every breath dissected. She felt like a moth poised before a flame, fragile and exposed, yet incapable of retreat. From the darkness, the alphas emerged, each one radiating an aura of dominance that seemed to bend the clearing to their will. Muscles coiled beneath fur, eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight, teeth glinting like polished blades. Their presence demanded obedience, respect, and fear. Ilara's stomach knotted, her heart hammering in rebellion against the terror it carried. She had seen these men before, towering and unyielding, yet tonight they were something more, predators circling, and she, a mere shadow, was their prey. Then he appeared. A figure broken in appearance, cloaked in rags and dust, yet every step he took carried a weight the others could not match. He moved quietly, almost silently, but his presence drew every eye that dared to glance in his direction. Ilara froze, caught between fear and fascination. There was something in his gaze, deep, unwavering, impossible to define. The man was ragged, yes, but the forest seemed to bend around him, waiting, holding its breath. Panic flared inside her, sharp and immediate. She could not be claimed. She would not. The thought struck with a clarity that surprised her. Any other choice would be surrender. Any other choice would mean being paraded before the pack, a pawn in their political games. She wanted to run, to vanish into the shadows she knew so well, but her feet betrayed her, frozen in the clearing as the crowd leaned closer, eager for spectacle. Then, almost without thinking, she moved forward. Her lips pressed against the rough, unshaven skin of the beggar. Brief but daring. Gasps erupted, shouts and whispers curling like smoke through the crowd. She pulled back, cheeks burning, heart racing as the enormity of her defiance struck. She had kissed him. The lowly girl had kissed the beggar. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then she saw it. A flicker, almost imperceptible, in his eyes. Something that was not anger, nor mockery, nor contempt. Curiosity. Admiration. Something that made her pulse twist in ways fear could not explain. Kaelan, though she did not yet know his name, though she could not yet see the crown hidden beneath the beggar's guise, watched her. Every move she made, every tremble of her fingers, every heartbeat that betrayed her terror, he observed with a patience and power that spoke louder than any roar or challenge. The elders murmured, their whispers sharp and cutting, but Ilara barely heard them. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, watching. She stumbled back, trying to retreat into the shadows she had always known, but there was no hiding. Not from him. Not now. Not ever. Something had shifted. A spark had been lit. And though she did not yet understand it, the kiss, the audacious, reckless act, had changed the course of her life. It had drawn her into a game she did not yet see, with stakes she could scarcely imagine. And in the quiet, steady gaze of the beggar who was not what he seemed, she felt the first, faint, dangerous brush of being truly seen. The crowd's murmurs swelled once more, but she no longer noticed. All that existed was the man whose eyes held the weight of a kingdom, and the spark between them that neither time nor fear could diminish. The night waited, and so did fate. Ilara barely remembered the walk back from the clearing. Her legs carried her, but her mind reeled in a haze of shock and defiance. The crowd's whispers still buzzed in her ears, sharp and relentless, yet one thought kept repeating itself, the beggar. The one she had kissed. Something about him lingered, an aura she could not name, a gravity she could not escape. She ducked behind the twisted roots of an old oak, pressing her trembling hands against her cheeks. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the lingering warmth of his lips a secret flame against the cool night. She tried to tell herself it had been an act of desperation, a fool's gamble, but the truth clawed at her. She had felt something there. Something dangerous, magnetic, terrifying in its intensity. Meanwhile, he followed. Quietly, imperceptibly, as if the forest itself conspired to keep his presence hidden. Kaelan moved like a shadow, steps measured, deliberate, yet every motion carried an invisible authority. He did not approach, did not speak, did not force his attention upon her, yet the weight of his gaze pressed against her chest with the gravity of the mountains. He was calm, almost indifferent, but there was no mistaking the scrutiny in his eyes. He saw her. All of her, her fear, her defiance, the fragile thread of pride she clung to, and he considered it with the patience of one who had waited centuries for something rare to appear. Ilara's fingers flexed into fists. She wanted to run, to retreat into the shadows she had always called home, but some deeper instinct held her rooted. His presence was not threatening, not yet, but it carried a promise she did not understand. She could feel it in her bones, a pull that was older than the forest, older than her fear. The elder's whispers reached her ears again, faint echoes against the pounding of her heart. The girl, the audacity. To kiss him. Reckless. Foolish. Their words scratched at her pride, but Kaelan's gaze did not falter. It lingered, slow, patient, and it carried a question she could not answer. And in that silence, in the weight of unspoken scrutiny, something shifted. For the first time, she felt seen, not as an object of ridicule, not as a shadow, not as someone to be overlooked, but as a person with worth, with fire. Her mind spun. Who was he? Why did he watch and wait instead of punishing her or shaming her? Every instinct she had screamed that she should flee, that the danger had only multiplied. Yet the pull toward him, the magnetism of his calm, commanding presence, made her legs heavy and her thoughts sluggish with longing and fear. She forced herself to take a step back, stumbling over a root, and he flinched, not in anger, but almost imperceptibly, as if her falter had been a crack in a mirror he was studying. There was something about him that unnerved her. A quiet power that did not need to roar. A restrained force that could crush, yet did not. The forest seemed to bend around them, shadows lengthening, whispers of wind threading between the trees like invisible fingers. He remained there, still observing, still silent, and Ilara could not look away. Each glance, each subtle movement of his head, each quiet shift of his stance, told her more than any words could. And then, a moment she would never forget, he tilted his head, just slightly, and in that tilt there was acknowledgement, faint amusement, and, dare she even imagine it, approval. Something inside her fluttered, tentative, like a bird testing the wind for flight. She turned, fled deeper into the forest, yet felt his gaze follow, unwavering. She did not know his name. She did not know his rank. She did not know the danger she had invited with a single impulsive act. And yet, she could not escape the gravity of it. The pull. The unspoken promise. The silent command that dared her to challenge fate and live beyond the expectations pressed upon her since birth. Somewhere deep in the night, Kaelan watched, quiet and unreadable. In his calm, there was patience. In his silence, there was fire. And in that gaze, Ilara, reckless, frightened, defiant Ilara, was already caught. The forest thinned as Ilara returned to the outskirts of the pack village, the shadows of the ceremony still clinging to her skin. Every whispered accusation, every astonished gasp of the crowd, replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. Her lips still burned from the kiss, a memory that felt impossibly daring, impossibly reckless, and impossibly dangerous. She had not kissed a beggar. She had kissed a force she did not understand, a presence she could not yet measure. The village was quiet now, the night settling like a velvet shroud over crooked huts and narrow paths. She slipped between them, unseen, trying desperately to fold herself back into the background she had always known. But the world had shifted. Even the shadows she once called refuge seemed to recoil from the memory of her defiance. She paused at a broken well, fingers brushing the cool stone, trying to still the tremble in her hands. Thoughts of her childhood, shunned, ignored, scorned, rushed back. She remembered the pack elder's eyes, dismissive and sharp, when she had first tried to speak. She remembered the children laughing behind their hands, whispers of her inadequacy that had followed her like a second skin. Every slight, every rejection, every moment of being overlooked had carved her into someone who moved quietly, who hid in the corners, who survived by being invisible. Yet tonight, she had been anything but invisible. The kiss, impulsive, defiant, had made her a spectacle. And though fear coiled around her chest like a living thing, a new sensation stirred beneath it, a strange, dizzying sense of power. She had acted on her own will, even if recklessly, and for one fleeting instant, she had mattered. Not because she was expected to, not because the pack decreed it, but because she had chosen to. Rumors, she knew, would spread by dawn. Already, whispers danced through the village like leaves in the wind. Did you see her? They say she kissed the beggar. The lowly girl, insolent, reckless. Ilara's jaw tightened. She had always been at the bottom of the hierarchy, a shadow among shadows. And yet now, she felt eyes on her in ways she could not name, threads of curiosity weaving through the gossip. Threads she could not yet trace. She sank to the edge of a creek, the cool water lapping at her fingertips, and allowed herself a rare moment of silence. Her reflection rippled in the current, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, hair tangled and unkempt. The girl staring back seemed fragile, yet defiance lingered there, raw and unpolished. The girl who had dared the impossible. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined the beggar, Kaelan, still watching. The thought made her pulse quicken, a tremor of both fear and longing stirring in her chest. She did not know his name, did not know his power, did not yet understand the danger he carried behind that calm, unreadable gaze. And yet, she could not stop thinking of him. Not as a beggar. Not as a shadow. Something more. Something she could not yet name. Night deepened, and the village slept fitfully, unaware of the storm that had been set into motion. Ilara pressed her palms to the earth, grounding herself, reminding herself that she was still small, still lowly, still unseen by the world, yet not by him. And that realization, both terrifying and exhilarating, pulled at her heart in ways she had never known. She remained at the creek long after the moon had risen high, tracing the ripples in the water, thinking of his gaze, thinking of the kiss, thinking of the fire she had ignited by a single act of defiance. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, a chain of fate had begun to wrap around her, invisible but unyielding. She could not yet see it, could not yet name it, and perhaps, she feared, could not yet escape it. Yet even as exhaustion tugged at her limbs, even as the shadows pressed in, a quiet ember of hope flared. Maybe, just maybe, this reckless act, this impossible kiss, had been more than survival. Maybe it had been the first step toward being seen, not as a shadow, not as someone to be dismissed, but as someone who mattered. And somewhere, in the silent spaces between heartbeat and breath, she felt it, the faintest echo of destiny, winding toward her like a river long dammed, ready to burst. The morning sun had barely pierced the forest canopy when Ilara found herself walking along the narrow path that led toward the training grounds. Her legs ached, not from the climb but from the lingering weight of the night before, the kiss, the whispers, the undeniable pull of the beggar's gaze. She had expected the world to continue as before, indifferent to her existence, but the forest seemed different now, as if it were holding its breath, watching her, waiting. She did not notice the shadow at first. A movement in the tree line, subtle, deliberate. A branch shifted, a leaf trembled, but the forest swallowed the sound. And yet, she felt it, a presence that followed her steps without noise, without recognition, and yet unmistakable in its intensity. Kaelan moved unseen, observing her with careful precision. He had watched the girl stumble into the clearing, watched her flinch at the judgment of the pack elders, watched her heart race and defy expectation in a single, reckless kiss. There was something in her, something rare, hidden beneath the layers of fear and lowly status, that had caught his attention. She was more than a shadow. She was a spark. And sparks, he knew, could ignite fires that even the strongest walls could not contain. The first test came in the form of a small obstacle. A fallen log stretched across the narrow path, jagged and slippery with moss. To anyone else, it was simple, a minor challenge. To Ilara, it felt monumental. Her hands shook as she reached for balance, her boots scraping against the slick wood. The shadow beside her shifted, almost imperceptibly, and the log gave way just enough that she caught herself before falling. She blinked. For a moment, she thought the forest had conspired to aid her, that some unseen force had guided her foot, her hand, her balance. And then she sensed it, a calm presence, just beyond the edge of vision, unmoving yet infinitely aware. Kaelan did not reveal himself. Not yet. Not ever. Every intervention was subtle, a whisper of guidance, a shift of circumstance that allowed her to succeed without understanding why. He was testing her, not her strength, not her cunning, not even her defiance, but the essence of who she was beneath it all. Could she persevere without protection? Could she act with courage when the world expected submission? Could she move with integrity, even when no one watched? Ilara reached the other side of the path, heart hammering, legs trembling, and paused to catch her breath. She had no idea why the log had not sent her crashing to the earth. She did not notice the gleam of amusement that flickered in the corner of her vision, or the invisible eyes that tracked her, analyzing, weighing, considering. The next challenge came at the training grounds. A pack elder had left a series of small tasks for the villagers, simple exercises in precision and patience. Ilara approached, hands tense, aware that failure would only deepen the whispers, the judgments, the lowly reputation she had spent her life trying to endure. She began the tasks cautiously, deliberately, each movement measured and careful. And yet, she felt it again. The quiet guidance, the near miss that prevented disaster, the subtle shift in circumstance that allowed her to move forward. When she completed the final task, exhaustion etched across her face, a small smile of relief escaped her lips. The forest was quiet, almost reverent. And though she could not see him, though she could not name him, she felt the presence of the beggar, the unseen guardian, the silent observer, lingering. It was not protection in the way of force or command. It was quiet, calculated, patient, and it carried a weight that made her chest tighten with something she could not name. Gratitude, relief, something darker, wilder, yet achingly tender, curling in her stomach like a flame she dared not touch. As she turned to leave the training grounds, a sudden rustle in the bushes made her spin. For one fleeting heartbeat, she thought he had appeared, had stepped from the shadows to confront her. But there was nothing. Only the wind, the trees, and the lingering sense of being watched. Ilara shivered, and a part of her knew that the tests were far from over. The beggar, Kaelan, was shaping the path before her, and though she did not yet understand it, she was learning to move with the forest, with the challenge, with the pull of forces she could neither see nor resist. Somewhere deep in the quiet of the woods, he smiled. Not openly, not yet. But in that invisible acknowledgement, in that subtle shift of circumstance that had kept her safe, he marked the first step of a journey neither of them could yet name. And though Ilara did not see it, though she could not yet recognize it, a thread had been woven between them, delicate, invisible, unbreakable, and the forest itself seemed to hum with its presence. The night had not yet come, the trials had not yet ended, and the pull of fate tightened around her heart with every silent, watchful moment. She would not know it yet, but the first sparks of trust, of curiosity, of something infinitely dangerous and beautiful, had already begun to glow. Ilara barely had time to catch her breath before the pack elders delivered a new task, a test disguised as routine, though its intent was unmistakable. She was to venture to the northern ridge, where the forest deepened and the shadows grew thick, to gather herbs needed for the upcoming ceremonies. Simple, they said. Dangerous, she knew. The ridge was notorious for wild shifters and lurking predators that had no patience for a low-status girl wandering alone. As she stepped onto the path, she realized she would not be alone. From the shadows emerged the beggar, the same one she had kissed during the mating ceremony. He did not remove the hood that hid most of his face, but his presence carried the weight of authority and power so complete that the forest seemed to bend toward him. Ilara's heart thudded in her chest, equal parts fear and disbelief. "You're coming with me," he said softly, voice low but steady, as if the words themselves commanded obedience. She could not look away, though she tried, forcing her mind to remember caution, survival, invisibility. Why are you here?" she asked, hesitating, unsure if she was daring to speak or just testing the boundaries of what she could risk. His eyes flicked to her briefly, sharp and assessing. "Because you will not survive this alone. And because I need to see if you can walk beside someone who will not falter." Ilara swallowed, a tangle of indignation and fear knotting her stomach. She had never walked beside someone who commanded respect without raising a hand. And yet, there was no choice. To refuse would invite humiliation, or worse, failure in a world where failure was not tolerated. They moved through the forest together, the space between them taut with unspoken words. The air smelled of moss and damp earth, each step carefully measured. Ilara noticed small things, how he moved quietly, how he sensed every tremor of the ground, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. He seemed attuned to the forest in ways that made her own presence feel clumsy, reckless, almost naive. They reached the first patch of herbs, delicate leaves shimmering with dew. Ilara bent to gather them, but a sudden shift in the underbrush made her freeze. She did not see the predator crouching, low and ready to strike, but Kaelan did. A step. A subtle shift. And the danger passed without a sound. Ilara's chest tightened, realization blooming like fire, he had saved her. Again. Without a word. Without revealing himself. I don't understand, she murmured, glancing at him. His hooded face betrayed nothing, but the silence carried a weight that demanded comprehension. You will, he said, voice low, calm, and impossibly commanding. For now, survive. Learn. Move with awareness, not fear. Fear will get you killed. The tension between them was electric, charged with unspoken questions, unacknowledged curiosity, and an attraction neither dared voice. Every glance, every subtle movement, every pause between steps carried meaning. Ilara found herself studying him, noticing details she could not have seen in the clearing. The curve of his jaw, the way his shoulders shifted, the quiet steadiness of his hands. And though she tried to hide it, a small part of her chest lifted with something she could not name, a fluttering of hope, or perhaps of desire. Hours passed. The forest thickened. Branches snagged, roots twisted beneath their feet, and the herbs grew sparse. And still, Kaelan was there, guiding, subtly protecting, never intervening overtly, never asking anything in return. He tested her without cruelty, impressed her without words, and she felt herself both challenged and drawn in ways she could not yet understand. Finally, as dusk painted the forest in shadows of indigo and silver, they reached the edge of the ridge. Ilara turned to him, chest heaving, sweat streaking her forehead, and realized she had survived. Not by luck. Not by chance. By walking beside him, by matching his steps, by trusting in the quiet force that had, inexplicably, chosen to protect her. He did not smile. He did not praise. He simply nodded once, imperceptibly, and began gathering his own share of herbs. But the unspoken acknowledgement between them was more powerful than any word. A fragile alliance had been formed, one built on necessity, trust, and the faintest glimmer of something that could, with time, become far more. Ilara exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. The forest whispered around them, alive with shadows and secrets, and she knew, though she could not yet name it, that this alliance, precarious as it was, would shape everything that came next. And somewhere, deep in the quiet pull of the ridge, Kaelan's gaze lingered, unseen yet undeniable, marking the first threads of connection between them. Ilara returned to the village under the fading glow of twilight, each step heavier than the last. Her arms carried bundles of herbs, their scents sharp and earthy, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the quiet, watchful presence of the beggar who had walked beside her. She had survived the ridge, yes, but survival now felt fragile, as though the world itself waited for her to falter. Whispers greeted her even before she reached the first hut. Small voices, quiet but biting, darting from shadow to shadow. Did you hear about her? She kissed the beggar, the audacity. She'll ruin herself if she thinks she can defy the pack. The words scraped against her, sharper than any thorn. She had known low status, she had known scorn. But the rumors, the relentless, creeping poison of gossip, were like a tide she could not hold back. Every eye she passed seemed to measure her worth, every murmur a judgment she could not escape. And somewhere in the crowd, she sensed it, the threads of danger coiling tighter around her. She could feel eyes that were not the villagers, unseen and calculating, watching, waiting. It was subtle, like the brush of wind against her neck, but it carried a weight she could not ignore. Kaelan was not beside her this time. She felt the absence like a missing pulse, the protection she had come to rely upon suddenly distant. And yet, she could not stop the awareness of him. The beggar's silent presence, the invisible shield he had cast around her earlier, and the promise that he would act when the time came. By nightfall, the whispers had grown sharper, edged with intention. A rival alpha, one whose eyes glinted with ambition and malice, had begun spreading more than gossip. Threats wrapped in politeness, challenges veiled as advice. Ilara could feel the weight of their strategy pressing against her, bending the world around her into shapes meant to humiliate and isolate. The village, once a place of quiet survival, now felt like a cage whose walls were lined with knives. She moved through the streets cautiously, head low, senses heightened. Every shadow seemed alive, every footstep echoed with potential danger. The village had always been familiar, predictable, safe in its monotony, but now it felt foreign, hostile, and impossibly threatening. And then, almost imperceptibly, she felt it, the presence in the shadows. The quiet movement of someone watching her from afar. Kaelin. She could not see him, could not speak his name aloud, but she knew he was there. Somewhere beyond the reach of the village lights, hidden beneath the folds of the night, he observed. Protecting. Waiting. Ensuring that no harm came to her without consequence. Ilara's chest tightened with a mixture of fear and relief. She could not yet understand him, could not yet name the power he carried beneath the guise of the beggar. And yet, she trusted him instinctively, in a way that terrified her. The quiet reassurance of his presence was a tether, a lifeline in a night that threatened to swallow her whole. The threats continued, subtle but sharp, an overturned basket of provisions, a quietly misplaced tool, a hushed warning from a neighbor who had once seemed friendly. Each one carried the weight of a predator testing her resolve, measuring her weakness. And through it all, Kaelin's invisible hand guided her, nudging her from danger without ever revealing himself. By the edge of the forest, she paused, looking back toward the village lights. The night had grown colder, the shadows deeper, and yet she felt a spark of something that had never been hers before, protection. Real, tangible, and quietly unyielding. The beggar, the silent observer, the unseen alpha, had chosen to guard her, and in that choice, something stirred within her, a fragile, flickering hope that she was not entirely alone. The forest whispered around her, alive with secrets, shadows, and possibilities. And in the quiet heartbeat of the night, Ilara understood, in a way she could not yet speak aloud, the game had changed. The world would no longer dismiss her. Not while he watched. Not while the threads of their fates had begun to intertwine. The moon hung low over the forest, silver and quiet, casting long, slanted shadows that moved like restless spirits. Ilara had slipped away from the village, driven not by defiance this time, but by a need she did not yet understand, a need to breathe, to escape the weight of whispers, threats, and the endless scrutiny of those who deemed her unworthy. She found herself in a small clearing, the grass damp with dew, the scent of pine and earth heavy around her. And then she felt it, the subtle movement, the weight of presence she had come to recognize, even without sight. Kaelin. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said softly, his voice low, careful, carrying authority without command. Ilara startled, her breath catching in her throat. She had not seen him emerge from the shadows, had not heard his footsteps, and yet here he was, always quiet, always observing, always near. I needed to get away, she admitted, voice trembling more from relief at not being alone than from fear. The village, the whispers, it's too much. He stepped closer, careful to keep the distance she might yet retreat into, and she noticed the faint glow of his eyes in the moonlight. There was no judgment there, only attention. And in that attention, she felt something dangerous, a pull, a curiosity, a recognition that she was not simply a shadow, but something more. You are stronger than they know, he said, voice barely above the rustle of leaves. Stronger than you know yourself. That is why I watch. That is why I stay near. Ilara's chest tightened. His words were not praise, not flattery, they were truth, and truth had a weight that neither comforted nor threatened. It simply existed, undeniable, and it forced her to look at herself in a way she had not dared before. She looked away, trying to hide the flush creeping up her neck. And why do you care? She asked quietly, almost to herself, almost afraid of the answer. His gaze softened, just a fraction, though it remained steady, unyielding. "Because you matter," he said, the simplicity of it striking like a drumbeat in the night. "And because someone must ensure that you are not broken by this world before you have the chance to stand on your own." Ilara's fingers flexed at her sides, a tension she could not name curling through her. She wanted to reach for him, to lean into the protection, to feel the warmth of someone who saw her fully and still did not flinch. And yet she stayed rooted, trembling, because something about him, something she could not yet name, demanded respect, caution, and attention. They moved through the clearing together, silent but not apart. He shared no details, no name, no explanation for the power he carried beneath his humble guise. Yet in the unspoken gestures, the subtle tilts of his head, the gentle guidance as she navigated uneven ground, the quiet presence beside her, he revealed more than words could convey. "You have always moved like a shadow," he said finally, voice low, as if speaking to the trees rather than her. "But shadows can hide. Shadows can survive. And shadows can be the only witness to truths the world refuses to see." Ilara's gaze met his, and for the first time, she felt seen not as a girl to be overlooked, not as a target of scorn, but as someone who could matter, someone who could belong, someone who could be chosen. Her heart fluttered with something raw and unpolished. Trust, fear, longing. She did not yet understand it, and perhaps she did not want to. A fox darted across the clearing, breaking the spell of silence, yet the moment lingered, delicate and fragile, like a thread stretched between them. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, to pull away from the edge of curiosity that made her chest ache, but she stayed, rooted by something beyond reason. Kaelin's gaze lingered, unwavering, patient. There was power there, quiet and restrained, and there was danger, always danger, but also something else, recognition, acceptance, a promise that she did not yet know how to name. The night deepened, and the forest whispered around them, carrying the scent of earth, pine, and possibility. Ilara knew, somewhere deep inside, that this moment would change her. That trust, fragile as it was, had been planted in the darkness. And that thread, delicate and unbroken, would only grow stronger, winding them closer together, whether she was ready or not. As she finally turned back toward the village, she felt the weight of unseen protection, the pull of invisible guidance, and the quiet promise that her life had been touched by a force both dangerous and beautiful. She did not yet know the magnitude of what was unfolding, but she felt it in the pulse of her veins, in the whisper of the wind, in the unrelenting gravity of the beggar's gaze that followed her, always, silently, from the shadows. The morning dawned with a brittle chill, and the village seemed sharper somehow, edges of shadows cutting closer, whispers more insistent, eyes harder than ever. Ilara had begun to feel a fragile confidence bloom within her. A sense that she could navigate the world, even as a lowly girl, with careful steps, cautious courage, and the quiet guidance of the beggar who lingered in the shadows. But trust is a fragile thing, and the world is quick to exploit it. She had confided, cautiously, in someone she believed a friend, a fellow villager who had shown fleeting kindness, someone whose smile seemed genuine amid the relentless judgment of others. The whisper of camaraderie had felt comforting, even a little daring, and Ilara, despite every instinct, allowed herself to hope. And yet, betrayal is a predator with quiet teeth. By midday, the village was buzzing. Not with the usual whispers of curiosity or malice, but with a storm of accusation and disgrace. The rumor of her kiss at the mating ceremony had been twisted, spread by her supposed friend to pack elders and rival factions. She had not kissed a beggar by choice, they said. She had insulted the Alpha King deliberately, flouting tradition, mocking the pack, and destabilizing the delicate balance of power. Ilara's stomach turned. Every heartbeat felt like lead, every breath a struggle. Faces she had once passed with only disdain now turned with judgment so sharp it cut. The whispers became pointed accusations. Disgraceful, one said. Foolish, another hissed. She should be punished for daring to defy the pack. Panic clawed at her chest. She sought the shadow of the forest for refuge, for the silent, protective presence of Kaelin, but she could not find him. For the first time, she felt the terrifying weight of being truly alone. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and she had no foothold. The elders called her forward, their voices like steel, unyielding. Ilara, one said, sharp and cold, You have dishonored this pack. You have defied tradition. You have endangered yourself and others. Your actions demand correction. Ilara's knees trembled, and for the first time in her life, she felt utterly exposed. She wanted to cry out, to explain, to run, but no words could undo the story that had been twisted against her. She felt the walls of the village closing in, the weight of expectation, punishment, and humiliation pressing down like iron. And then she saw him, Kalen, or at least the shadow of him, watching from the edge of the clearing. His eyes, dark and unreadable beneath the beggar's guise, narrowed with a tension she could not yet decipher. He did not move forward. He did not intervene. And in that moment, her heart broke a little, a sharp pang of fear, despair, and helplessness twisting in her chest. The rival Alpha stepped closer, a smirk curling his lips as he addressed the elders. She acts recklessly, without thought. She cannot be trusted. If the beggar is truly an Alpha, why does he hide her? Why does he allow disgrace to unfold? I needed to get away, she admitted, voice trembling more from relief at not being alone than from fear. The village, the whispers, it's too much. He stepped closer, careful to keep the distance she might yet retreat into, and she noticed the faint glow of his eyes in the moonlight. There was no judgment there, only attention. And in that attention, she felt something dangerous, a pull, a curiosity, a recognition that she was not simply a shadow, but something more. You are stronger than they know, he said, voice barely above the rustle of leaves. Stronger than you know yourself. That is why I watch. That is why I stay near. Ilara's chest tightened. His words were not praise, not flattery, they were truth, and truth had a weight that neither comforted nor threatened. It simply existed, undeniable, and it forced her to look at herself in a way she had not dared before. She looked away, trying to hide the flush creeping up her neck. And why do you care? She asked quietly, almost to herself, almost afraid of the answer. His gaze softened, just a fraction, though it remained steady, unyielding. Because you matter, he said, the simplicity of it striking like a drumbeat in the night. And because someone must ensure that you are not broken by this world before you have the chance to stand on your own. Ilara's fingers flexed at her sides, a tension she could not name curling through her. She wanted to reach for him, to lean into the protection, to feel the warmth of someone who saw her fully and still did not flinch. And yet she stayed rooted, trembling, because something about him, something she could not yet name, demanded respect, caution, and attention. They moved through the clearing together, silent but not apart. He shared no details, no name, no explanation for the power he carried beneath his humble guise. Yet in the unspoken gestures, the subtle tilts of his head, the gentle guidance as she navigated uneven ground, the quiet presence beside her, he revealed more than words could convey. You have always moved like a shadow, he said finally, voice low, as if speaking to the trees rather than her. But shadows can hide. Shadows can survive. And shadows can be the only witness to truths the world refuses to see. Ilara's gaze met his, and for the first time, she felt seen not as a girl to be overlooked, not as a target of scorn, but as someone who could matter, someone who could belong, someone who could be chosen. Her heart fluttered with something raw and unpolished. Trust, fear, longing. She did not yet understand it, and perhaps she did not want to. A fox darted across the clearing, breaking the spell of silence, yet the moment lingered, delicate and fragile, like a thread stretched between them. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, to pull away from the edge of curiosity that made her chest ache, but she stayed, rooted by something beyond reason. Kalen's gaze lingered, unwavering, patient. There was power there, quiet and restrained, and there was danger, always danger, but also something else, recognition, acceptance, a promise that she did not yet know how to name. The night deepened, and the forest whispered around them, carrying the scent of earth, pine, and possibility. Ilara knew, somewhere deep inside, that this moment would change her. That trust, fragile as it was, had been planted in the darkness. And that thread, delicate and unbroken, would only grow stronger, winding them closer together, whether she was ready or not. As she finally turned back toward the village, she felt the weight of unseen protection, the pull of invisible guidance, and the quiet promise that her life had been touched by a force both dangerous and beautiful. She did not yet know the magnitude of what was unfolding, but she felt it in the pulse of her veins, in the whisper of the wind, in the unrelenting gravity of the beggar's gaze that followed her, always, silently, from the shadows. The morning dawned with a brittle chill, and the village seemed sharper somehow, edges of shadows cutting closer, whispers more insistent, eyes harder than ever. Ilara had begun to feel a fragile confidence bloom within her, a sense that she could navigate the world, even as a lowly girl, with careful steps, cautious courage, and the quiet guidance of the beggar who lingered in the shadows. But trust is a fragile thing, and the world is quick to exploit it. She had confided, cautiously, in someone she believed a friend, a fellow villager who had shown fleeting kindness, someone whose smile seemed genuine amid the relentless judgment of others. The whisper of camaraderie had felt comforting, even a little daring, and Ilara, despite every instinct, allowed herself to hope. And yet, betrayal is a predator with quiet teeth. By midday, the village was buzzing. Not with the usual whispers of curiosity or malice, but with a storm of accusation and disgrace. The rumor of her kiss at the mating ceremony had been twisted, spread by her supposed friend to pack elders and rival factions. She had not kissed a beggar by choice, they said. She had insulted the Alpha King deliberately, flouting tradition, mocking the pack, and destabilizing the delicate balance of power. Ilara's stomach turned. Every heartbeat felt like lead, every breath a struggle. Faces she had once passed with only disdain now turned with judgment so sharp it cut. The whispers became pointed accusations. Disgraceful, one said. Foolish, another hissed. She should be punished for daring to defy the pack. Panic clawed at her chest. She sought the shadow of the forest for refuge, for the silent, protective presence of Kaelan, but she could not find him. For the first time, she felt the terrifying weight of being truly alone. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and she had no foothold. The elders called her forward, their voices like steel, unyielding. Ilara, one said, sharp and cold, you have dishonored this pack. You have defied tradition. You have endangered yourself and others. Your actions demand correction. Ilara's knees trembled, and for the first time in her life, she felt utterly exposed. She wanted to cry out, to explain, to run, but no words could undo the story that had been twisted against her. She felt the walls of the village closing in, the weight of expectation, punishment, and humiliation pressing down like iron. And then she saw him, Kaelan, or at least the shadow of him, watching from the edge of the clearing. His eyes, dark and unreadable beneath the beggar's guise, narrowed with a tension she could not yet decipher. He did not move forward. He did not intervene. And in that moment, her heart broke a little, a sharp pang of fear, despair, and helplessness twisting in her chest. The rival Alpha stepped closer, a smirk curling his lips as he addressed the elders. She acts recklessly, without thought. She cannot be trusted. If the beggar is truly an alpha, why does he hide her? Why does he allow disgrace to unfold? Ilara's head spun. The accusations, the whispers, the orchestrated humiliation, they were all a trap. She had been set up. The fragile trust she had begun to nurture shattered, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, alone. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she swallowed them. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. And yet, as the village closed in, as the accusations escalated, as the weight of betrayal threatened to crush her, she felt the silent pull of Kaelan's presence, distant but undeniable. Somewhere deep within her, a flicker of defiance remained. She did not yet know how she would survive, but she knew she would. Because even in betrayal, even in public disgrace, the shadow of someone powerful and unseen hovered at the edge of the storm, waiting, watching, and poised to act. And that knowledge, barely a thread, fragile and tenuous, was enough to keep her from crumbling entirely. The clearing was alive with whispers and accusations, a storm of judgment that pressed against Ilara from every side. The rival Alpha's smirk burned into her chest, the elder's eyes glinting with cold authority. Her heart hammered, every beat screaming that she was utterly exposed, utterly alone. She had never felt the weight of humiliation like this before, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she might collapse beneath it. Then, the air shifted. A tremor ran through the trees, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the warning growl of a distant storm. The villagers faltered, glances darting toward the forest's edge. And then he stepped forward, no longer the ragged beggar she had kissed in defiance, no longer a shadow behind the trees. Kaelan emerged, tall, commanding, his presence radiating power that bent the very air around him. The rags had fallen away, revealing the gleam of dark armor that spoke of kingship, of strength, of authority absolute. His eyes, piercing and unyielding, swept over the village, and in that instant, every whisper faltered, every accusation froze. The Alpha King had arrived. "Elara," he said, his voice low but carrying through the clearing like the toll of a bell. "She is under my protection." The world seemed to tilt. Every head turned, every jaw tightened. The rival Alpha stepped back, shock flashing across his features, the smugness replaced by a flicker of fear. Even the elders, steeped in tradition and authority, faltered under the undeniable force of Kaelan's presence. Ilara's chest tightened, her knees trembling. Relief surged through her, fierce and burning, yet mixed with awe, disbelief, and a pulse of something deeper she could not yet name. The man who had been a beggar, the silent observer who had walked beside her through the forest, was now the Alpha King. And he had come for her. "You will speak no ill of her," Kaelan continued, his gaze sweeping over the village with calm authority. "She is my mate, chosen by none other than me, and none of you have the right to question it." A ripple ran through the crowd. Gasps, whispers, and stunned silence tangled together. Ilara felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame, but from the undeniable truth of what had been declared. She was no longer a shadow, no longer lowly, no longer invisible. She had been claimed, publicly, irrevocably, by the most powerful alpha of them all. Her legs trembled as Kaelan reached her side, his hand brushing against hers, steadying, grounding, protective. The touch carried a weight she had not expected. Strength tempered with tenderness, authority softened by care. She dared to meet his gaze, and in it, she saw the spark that had always been there in the beggar's eyes. Curiosity, admiration, and something infinitely dangerous and beautiful. The rival alpha shrank back, fury mingling with humiliation. The pack elders exchanged hurried, worried glances, realizing the game had shifted irreversibly. Kaelan's presence alone had rewritten the rules, and the world trembled beneath the certainty of his power. Ilara's chest swelled with a mix of fear and awe. She had been powerless moments before, trapped in the web of rumors and betrayal, and now she stood beside him, shielded by strength she had only glimpsed before, yet never dared to imagine. Kaelan lowered his gaze to her, voice soft, private, but carrying weight that made her pulse quicken. "You are safe now," he said, "and I will not allow anyone to harm you again." She wanted to speak, to thank him, to confess the whirlwind of emotions crashing inside her, but no words came. All she could do was look up at him, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and something deeper burning in her chest. The clearing was silent now, the villagers too stunned to breathe, too aware of the unshakable truth standing before them. Kaelan's power was undeniable. His claim was absolute. And for the first time, Ilara allowed herself to believe in a future where she was not just surviving, but protected, chosen, and seen for who she truly was. And as she stood there, hand in his, heart hammering, the forest around them seemed to echo with the promise of storms yet to come, battles yet to be fought, and a connection neither time nor fear could sever. The village had grown quiet, yet the tension lingered like smoke that refuses to dissipate. Ilara's hand remained in Kaelan's, but her pulse had not settled. Being claimed by the Alpha King had shifted everything, yet it had not erased the dangers that circled like wolves on the outskirts. Rival factions within the pack were restless, their envy and ambition bubbling just beneath the surface. Some had already begun plotting, their glances sharp, their whispers hidden yet poisonous. Kaelan's presence beside her was a shield, but it was also a reminder of the magnitude of the stakes. Every move they made, every breath she took, was now under scrutiny. The Alpha King did not merely protect her because he wanted to. He moved with strategy, calculating threats, anticipating betrayal. And Ilara felt the weight of his power pressing against her own fragile sense of safety. "You must understand," Kaelan said quietly, as they walked through the forest away from the village. "Being beside me is not without danger. The pack will test you, the rivals will try to manipulate you, and I will not always be able to intervene before they strike." Ilara swallowed, her throat dry. I can handle it, she whispered, though her voice lacked certainty. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he reached out and lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. Do you? He asked, voice low, but carrying the weight of command and expectation. Because the world will not wait for you to grow stronger. It will test you, push you to the edge, and only those who survive the fire can stand with me. She nodded, though fear coiled tightly in her chest. Being chosen had elevated her beyond her wildest dreams, yet it had also exposed her to dangers she could not have imagined. Already, rumors were circulating of plots to control her, to manipulate Kaelan through her. Already, eyes followed her in the village, cold, calculating, full of intent. They moved together to a secluded ridge overlooking the valley, the wind rustling through the trees like whispered warnings. Kaelan's presence was constant, steady, protective. But even so, Ilara felt the invisible chains of expectation and danger wrapping tighter around her. She had been elevated, yet every elevation carries a cost. Every claim carries responsibility. You are not merely my mate, Kaelan said, voice strong yet soft. You are a symbol. Every choice you make, every step you take, will be watched. Your courage will be tested. Your loyalty will be questioned. And those who seek to harm you will not hesitate. Ilara shivered, not from cold but from the weight of the truth. Power was a dangerous thing. Being claimed by the Alpha King brought safety, yes, but it also made her a target, a pawn, and a lightning rod for envy and malice. She had never imagined that a kiss born of fear and defiance could entangle her in chains this heavy. Yet, standing beside him, she also felt the pull of something profound: protection, trust, and the promise of strength. The chains were heavy, yes, but they were tempered by the assurance of his presence, his vigilance, and the quiet, unyielding way he had made her his own. Kaelan's hand brushed hers again, softer this time, almost tender. You are stronger than you think, he said, almost to himself, almost as a vow to the world. And I will ensure that you survive. That you stand, unbroken, at my side. Ilara looked up at him, all mingling with fear, desire, and determination. The forest whispered around them, shadows dancing across their faces, carrying the weight of challenges yet to come. She felt it, an unspoken promise that whatever threats, plots, or dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. The chains of power might press against her, constricting, relentless, and heavy. But with him, the Alpha King, at her side, she felt a flicker of courage. A spark that whispered that survival was possible, that trust could be earned, and that love, even slow, cautious, fraught with peril, could endure in the harshest of worlds. And as the wind whispered through the leaves, Ilara realized that the greatest danger might not be the pack, nor the rival factions, nor the threats of politics. It might be the undeniable, unrelenting pull she felt toward him, the Alpha who had claimed her, and the life she could no longer imagine without him. The sun rose over the pack grounds like molten gold, casting long, golden shafts of light across the assembled members of the pack. Ilara stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart hammering with a mix of fear, awe, and anticipation. The whispers had begun even before the Alpha arrived, small ripples of speculation spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some eyes were filled with curiosity, others with envy, and many with barely concealed malice. She had survived betrayal, danger, and whispers, but this, the public declaration, was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Her chest tightened with the weight of what was to come, and her fingers curled into the folds of her gown, seeking some semblance of control. Then, the forest fell silent. A hush swept across the pack as Kaelan appeared, stepping into the open with the quiet authority that demanded attention. He was no longer the beggar, no longer a shadow at the edge of the clearing. He was the Alpha King, a presence so powerful that it seemed to pull the very light toward him. Every head turned. Every whisper ceased. Ilara, he said, his voice low, steady, carrying across the expanse of the gathering. Come forward. Her legs trembled, but she obeyed. Each step toward him felt like walking across a chasm. Dangerous, impossible, yet necessary. The pack watched in stunned silence as she reached his side, her heart pounding, her pulse screaming in her ears. Kaelan's gaze swept across the crowd, sharp and unyielding. This woman, he said, voice rising with the weight of command, is my mate. She has been chosen by none other than me, and I will not allow whispers, envy, or fear to dictate her worth. She stands beside me, and all who would question her place will answer to me." A murmur ran through the crowd, disbelief and shock mingling with awe. Ilara felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame, but from the undeniable truth of the moment. She had been hidden, overlooked, dismissed, and yet here she stood, claimed and protected by the most powerful alpha in the pack. Kalen extended his hand, and she took it, the contact grounding her, steadying her trembling limbs. The simple gesture carried more weight than words ever could, a promise of protection, of trust, and of a bond that was now undeniable and public. The rival alpha, who had once smirked with confidence, now stepped back, rage and humiliation flashing across his face. The pack elders exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the delicate balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Kalen's claim was absolute. His protection over Ilara was absolute. And the world, for the first time, had to recognize her as something more than lowly, something more than overlooked, something chosen, revered, and untouchable. Ilara's chest swelled with a mix of relief, awe, and something she could not yet name, desire, perhaps, or the raw, unpolished thrill of being seen, fully and without apology. She looked up at Kalen, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine, and she felt the first spark of courage ignite within her. "You belong here," he whispered, so only she could hear, the words soft yet impossible to ignore. "And I will make certain no one forgets it." The crowd remained silent, but Ilara no longer heard them. She only heard him, his presence, his strength, and the promise that she was no longer hidden. She was chosen. She was protected. She was seen. And in that moment, as the sun gilded the forest and the pack watched in stunned awe, she understood that nothing would ever be the same. She had survived whispers, betrayal, and danger, but now she was claimed. Publicly, irrevocably, by the Alpha King who had walked beside her through shadow, fear, and uncertainty. And though the world might try to challenge them, to test them, to tear them apart, Ilara knew this truth in her bones. She was no longer a shadow. She was his. The night had settled over the pack lands like a velvet cloak, stars glimmering faintly through the canopy of trees. The village, once a place of whispers and judgment, now lay quiet, as if holding its breath. Ilara stood beside Kalen, her hand nestled in his, feeling the weight of everything they had endured, and the promise of what was to come. She no longer felt small. No longer invisible. No longer afraid. She had been claimed, publicly and irrevocably, by the Alpha King. And in that claim, she had found more than protection. She had found belonging, recognition, and the first true stirrings of a love that felt both fierce and tender, wild and inevitable. Kalen turned to her, the faint glow of the moon catching the edges of his dark features. His eyes softened, the quiet, restrained power giving way to something warmer, more intimate. "You have walked through shadow, through fear, through whispers meant to break you," he said, voice low, deliberate, carrying both awe and care. "And yet here you are, unbroken, standing with me, chosen, my mate." Ilara's chest tightened with emotion. Words failed her. How could she express the gratitude, the awe, the surge of something deeper she barely understood? Instead, she leaned into him, letting the quiet strength of his presence steady her. The forest around them seemed to hum with approval, the rustle of leaves and whisper of wind like a celebration, subtle yet undeniable. "You see me," she whispered, voice trembling, "for who I am, not for what I was told to be." Kalen's hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle but firm, grounding her. "I see you," he said simply, "and I will not let the world convince me otherwise." They moved together through the forest, hand in hand, their steps synchronized, a rhythm born not from necessity but from trust. Around them, the shadows of the night felt less like threats and more like witnesses to a union forged in trials, strengthened by adversity, and tempered by quiet understanding. Even the rival factions and whispering villagers had learned that power was not only in status but in choice, in presence, in the unwavering will of an alpha who would not allow harm to touch the one he had claimed. Ilara had become more than a shadow. She had become the Beggar Queen, a symbol of resilience, defiance, and the transformative power of love. They stopped at a clearing high above the village, where the wind tugged at her gown and the stars seemed to stretch endlessly overhead. Kaelin drew her close, not with force, but with a careful, protective intimacy that made her heart ache with something fierce and fragile all at once. "You are mine," he said, voice low, tender, carrying a promise that reverberated through her very soul. "And I am yours. Publicly. Forever. And no one, no rival, no whisper, no shadow of doubt, will take you from me." Elara pressed herself closer, feeling the strength of him, the security, the quiet authority that had protected her from the shadows for so long. In his arms, she allowed herself to let go of fear, to embrace the truth that she had been chosen not for status, beauty, or obedience, but for the courage and spirit that had always burned quietly within her. And in that embrace, the forest seemed to sigh, the night itself settling around them with gentle approval. They were no longer simply alpha and mate, protector and hidden girl. They were partners, equals in their bond, bound by trust, survival, and a love that had endured trials the world had thrown at them. The whispers of the past had vanished. The shadows of doubt had faded. And in the quiet of the night, beneath the endless stars, Elara finally understood the truth that had been waiting for her all along. She was not just protected. She was not just chosen. She was loved, fully, fiercely, and irrevocably. And as Kaelin held her close, his breath brushing her hair, she allowed herself to believe it. For the first time, completely and without fear. She was the Beggar Queen. He was the Alpha King. And together, they were unstoppable.